Just a few years ago, I graduated from college. My name is Kaylee, I'm 26 years old, and I was studying business. Anyways, that's enough about me for now. I remember it all just like it was yesterday. The worst and most terrifying day of my life. It was just another normal day in the life of me waking up at 5 o'clock and getting ready. I wake up really early so I have time to shower, do my makeup, and just sit around and enjoy my morning before school. All of a sudden I received a text from my best friend Eva. She started blowing my phone up, so after about the 5th message, I put down my hair straightener so I could see what all the fuss was about. She was texting me about her boyfriend, saying the usual, how he was crazy and was acting psycho again. This was nothing new, although still very alarming because her ex was genuinely crazy. He was super controlling and very invasive. He didn't let Eva have an ounce of privacy. My friends and I hated him from the get-go, and we never had any clue as to what she saw in him. But at the end of the day, if I would have known just how crazy he was, I would not have let her stay with that nutcase for as long as she did. So everything hit its breaking point when her boyfriend, who I'm going to call Alex for the sake of this story, started accusing Eva of cheating and all this nonsense. Eva was getting sick of the constant interrogations by him, so she ended up blocking him for the whole entire day. We thought that was going to be the end of it. She was my roommate. Well, not technically, but she would sneak into my room just about every night, and we would study and gossip or whatever. I guess she forgot to unblock him or something, but I don't know. It was around 10 o'clock at night when all of a sudden she received a notification. We must have both been just drifting off asleep, because I remember that it had woken us both up. The text was a message request from a stranger on Instagram. The message read, "Open the door." All of a sudden, there was this loud banging on the door. I started to panic. Probably not as bad as Eva, though. Because once we put 2 and 2 together, we realized that it was almost certainly Alex coming for revenge. Our plan was to sit and wait it out in hopes he would just go away, but that didn't work. "Let me in, you stupid bitch. I know you're in there. You've just been caught red-handed." The man was practically screaming, and it didn't even sound like Alex, but we knew it was him deep down. Ah! I knew right then and there that we weren't going to get off easy. He had been at the door for probably 5 minutes, and he even started kicking it, trying to break it down. I called the police, but who knows how long it would take for them to show up. Out of nowhere, I heard loud footsteps dissipating in the distance, and they grew quieter as they moved farther away, until eventually, it was dead silent. Apparently, the noise awoke my dorm neighbors, and 2 separate people actually got a hold of the campus night security, and they showed up to my door just a minute later. I was skeptical at first that maybe it was just Alex trying to trick us, but I was feeling ballsy, so I just opened the door and tried my luck. I told them what happened, and when the police finally arrived, I told them as well. While an officer was talking with us, another deputy actually found him in the parking lot trying to escape. He was caught with a knife, a bondage rope, and a bunch of pills. It disturbs me to even think about what he was going to try and do that night, but I think it's best for me to not try and imagine. I stayed up until probably 1 o'clock in the morning that night, and I woke up probably once or twice in the middle of the night, and every time I struggled to fall back asleep. That's how frightened I was. I knew he was in jail, but it shook us up so badly that for the next few weeks, Eva and I stayed in a friend's dorm until we were comfortable with being in our old room again. That wasn't the end of Alex though, unfortunately. Eva broke up with him for good after that, of course, but he would still try to come around sometimes. He was never as violent, but still, there was something seriously off about that guy. When I was in college, something weird happened to me. I was 21 at the time, and a full-time student. I was living in my dorm, but also part-time staying at home with my parents still as well. One night, I was in my friend's room and we were just hanging out for a bit. Once dusk started to show outside, that was usually my cue to go back to my dorm for the night and get settled in. Well, we got carried away playing the Wii and I lost track of time. It was probably around 9 o'clock when I picked my phone up that I realized what time it was. It wasn't really a big deal or anything, but I told my friend it was getting late and that I should probably head out. He agreed as well, and we said our goodbyes. I had to use the restroom before I went back to my room. The bathroom was well out of my way, but I really had to go, so I figured I'd better hurry. When I turned the corner and looked down the hall, the lights were flickering in front of the bathroom. The bathroom was all the way at the end of the hall to the left, and it looked really creepy. I would be lying if I said I didn't stop in my tracks and stare for a second. Looking back, I was definitely being a pansy, but something inside of me must have knew something was off. After a few seconds of standing there, I heard some strange noises coming from the bathroom. There were some banging sounds along with some squeaky footsteps. I sort of just stood there for a second, trying to decide if I should just turn around and go to the other bathroom. But the other bathroom was really far away, and I felt like I was just being paranoid, so I decided against that. I made my way to the entry, and as I got closer, I could feel this negative energy in my chest that almost felt like it was telling me to turn around, but I ignored it. I was probably no more than 10 steps away from the entry at this point. As I walked in, I thought I saw a shadow out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned my head, I didn't see anyone. I started to hear a faint whisper, despite how creeped out I was feeling and that my whole body was in shock. I started opening the stalls one by one, and surely, after opening a few, there he was. I had to rub my eyes to make sure I was seeing clearly. It was the freaking janitor. He was sitting on the toilet all tweaked out, and he looked like he had just been through some shit. He was sitting in there doing drugs and was borderline unconscious. He seemed to be going through some sort of drug-induced psychosis, but I'm not an expert. All I know is he looks crazy, and I wanted no part of it. Like your average crackhead you would see on the side of the road in a rough part of town. I always knew he was weird, but geez, I didn't help him either. As a matter of fact, I didn't even say a word to him, and I'm pretty sure he didn't even notice me one bit. That might sound kind of shitty of me, but I really didn't want to get involved. I never snitched on him either. I just did my business in the bathroom and left. By the way, I know what you're thinking. I didn't just leave him there to die. I was almost positive he wasn't overdosing, but just going through it. Either way, it's not my job to look after a 50-year-old man. From the looks of it, he must have been masturbating or something too, because he had his pants pulled down with his underwear half covering his genitals and his hands in his drawers. I was honestly just so creeped out that I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible and never have to think of that shit again. I know I probably should have told someone with authority at school, but I never did. Of course, I told some friends about it though, and the word got around about what he was doing, but no one was really surprised. Besides, he has a lot worse rumors than that to worry about. Apparently he's a kitty fiddler. I don't even know if that's true, but what I do know is he's a menace to society. I hate to be prejudiced, but there is something wrong about him, and I felt that way about him from day one. One night, I must have just dozed off, because the last thing I remember was watching that OG movie Sandlot. But I awoke in a slight panic when I heard a loud noise coming from outside my room. I was in college at the time, so I was living in a small dorm. It wasn't usual to hear people outside in the hall that late at night. I looked at my phone, and it was midnight. I listened for a second as the noise continued. I waited a little longer, but suddenly it went quiet. I thought it was nothing, so I said screw it, and I put my head back down. Just as I was about to doze off, someone started banging on my door. I literally jumped out of my bed, this time pretty pissed off because at this point, I thought it was either a friend or just some random person messing with me. I stormed out into the hall after opening my door, but no one was there. I didn't know what to think, so I just yelled in hopes that they would hear me and that whoever it was knew I wasn't messing around. I shut and locked the door, but I kept my eyes and ears peeled for like 10 minutes. And sure enough, the banging sound on my door came yet again. But this time, with a loud scream from a guy. He was screaming over and over, saying to help him. Once again, I jumped out of bed and I rushed out there as fast as I could, but they were gone again. I was in such a fit of rage that I didn't even think about what I was doing. I just ran looking for them. When you walk out of my door, you can either go left or right, so I tried my luck with going right, because I just had that gut feeling. I had no reason to believe that they went that way, but ultimately I had to make a decision, and at this point, trying anything was better than nothing, as I was desperate to find out who the hell had been messing with me. I walked to the end of the hall and I turned the corner and I saw my best friend Thomas. Coincidence? I think not. "What the hell is wrong with you, bro? You seriously freaked me the hell out," I said. Thomas swore he had no idea what I was talking about, but I barely believed him. He was either an incredible actor or it really wasn't him. I honestly wasn't sure what to believe. I think I just wanted to pin it on him and believe that it was him and that it was over. I should have listened to him though, because if I did, maybe I wouldn't have let my guard down so easily and had have gone through the most traumatizing experience ever. I'll never forget the look on Thomas's face as I walked back into my room. He genuinely looked confused. I had to be up really early in the morning though, so I was just ready to get back to sleep. I spent probably an hour tossing and turning in my sheets until eventually I think I started to doze off, when all of a sudden there was kicking from under my bed. I jumped up and I looked under there, but there was nobody. At this point, I was sure that my mind was playing tricks on me. I was freaking out, so I walked out of my room and I planned on sleeping over at my friend's for the night. I hoped he was awake, as he usually was at this time of night. But as soon as I opened the door and stepped out into the hall, there he was looking at me from the other side of the hallway, staring blankly at me, some sort of sharp pointy object in his hand. I don't know why I didn't just go back to my room. Everything happened so fast. I just made a split-second decision and I ran all the way across the hall and down some stairs. I then hid in the janitor's room successfully without the man seeing me. Still to this day, whoever he was has never been arrested, at least from what I know of. I don't know who he is or what he wanted with me, but he doesn't work for the school or anything because he was caught on camera and nobody recognized him. Somehow he escaped campus without being seen or caught, and no one has heard of him since. Sometimes I wonder if he's done this to other people, and that he's probably still out there. I honest to God feel like he could be a serial killer that has never been caught, or who knows. God was on my side that night. There was this guy in high school named Clyde. Pretty much everyone kept their distance from him except for his two friends, who were equally gross. In my junior year, I had the misfortune of being assigned to a seat right next to him in one of my classes. I immediately planned to ask the teacher to move my seat at the end of class period on the first day, but before I could even get a chance, Clyde was already starting to annoy me. He kept asking all these questions about where I got my bag and my shoes and my top, if my hair color was natural or dyed, and all of this was coming from a person whose ass I could smell from 3 feet away. I made it through the first class period and I stayed after to talk to the teacher, but she totally stonewalled me. She was one of those teachers that never really made expectations for anyone or anything. I had been warned about her by some seniors before. I thought she would let it slide instead of making a girl sit next to the foulest creep in the school for the whole year, but no. It only took a couple of days for Clyde to develop a crush on me. To make matters worse, I was still walking to and home from school. Clyde found out about this and he took the opportunity to follow me home one day, or as he put it, escort me home to make sure I was safe, as if I hadn't been able to take care of myself for the last 2 years. My house was a 15-minute walk from the school. It was usually a perfect amount of time and went through a good area, a time to relax between responsibilities and clear my head. Clyde took this and made it feel like eternal hell. We were out in the open, so everybody in the school was able to see us. Most people knew about what was going on, but some people actually thought I wanted to hang out with him. When I knew I had to sit next to him permanently, I tried to be as nice as I could, which wasn't very nice, but even that had been too much. It was too late to be mean, because I tried that too, and it didn't work. He found a way to gush about everything I said and did. He kept comparing us and arguing that we were very similar somehow. He was obsessed with the idea that we could get together and be like Bonnie and Clyde, but my name isn't even close to Bonnie. The worst part of him walking with me was the fact that he knew where I lived. It's not a surprise that he tried to invite himself in, but I drew a hard line there and almost spit in his face. The only reason I didn't is because he probably would have really enjoyed that. I tried talking to my counselor about this to see if I could change classes, but he was also unhelpful. He would say things like, "Clyde hasn't done anything wrong," which was pretty much useless for me. At the beginning of September, we had a 3-day weekend for Labor Day. I reveled in having an extra day away from Clyde, but I was fully aware that he was responsible for the fact that I hadn't been able to reconnect with any of my friends from school, which meant I had no plans for the weekend. I was so depressed that all I wanted to do was lay in bed anyway. I only had one thing going on, which was a baby shower on Saturday for a relative I barely knew. The night before, I had terrible sleep. I kept getting rushes of anxiety for seemingly no reason, and every time I started to fall asleep, I fell straight into a nightmare about Clyde. At one point, I woke up and I even thought I saw his face in the window. I had a mini heart attack, but when I blinked, he was gone. Just to be sure, I got up and I looked outside, but there was no sign of him in the backyard. I closed my blinds and I even put down the blackout curtains I never use. I couldn't sleep at all after that. I really couldn't decide if what I saw was real or just a visual disturbance. Sometimes when I'm just waking up, I see a crystal clear vision of a giant spider descending toward me on a thread, but when I blink, it goes away before my body even wakes up enough to move. In the morning, I asked my parents to make extra sure that we locked up the house before we left for the baby shower. I told them about the situation with Clyde and how he had been following me around. Thankfully, at least they had a concern for me. My dad assured me that he would lock the house, and my mother went the extra mile of reminding me that she was a good shot with a taser. And then she gave me the little bottle of pepper spray from her keychain. It made me feel a little bit better, but I was still out of it the whole day. My relatives kept asking me if I was okay, and all I could say was yes. We didn't get home until about 8 o'clock that night. I had a snack in the kitchen, and while I was there, I made sure that the back door was still locked. Afterward, I went straight to my room and I watched YouTube videos on my laptop until I passed out. Sometime later, I woke up, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe either. I was gripped with sleep paralysis. The closest thing I have had to a sleep paralysis demon is the dangling spider I mentioned earlier, but there was no sign of a spider. I kept trying to force myself to take a breath, but it was like I had forgotten how to do it. I tried to relax instead, and I looked around my room, but I got creeped out because it was darker than usual due to the curtains. Of course, I could clearly see Clyde's face peeking over the edge of my bed. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest, but I still couldn't move. I kept staring at his face, waiting for it to go away, praying for it to be a hallucination. But when I blinked, he didn't go away. He moved. Clyde slowly stood up and hovered over me. "Let's have a sleepover," he whispered as he approached my mouth with a strip of duct tape. At the last second, I broke free from the grip of sleep paralysis and screamed as I grabbed the pillow next to me and stuffed it into his face. He blindly stuck the piece of tape over my mouth, but while he couldn't see what was going on, I quickly reached underneath the pillow I was sleeping on and grabbed the pepper spray my mother gave me and undid the safety like she explained. Then I pointed it right at his face at the exact moment he ripped the pillow away. I fired the spray and it nailed him as well as it possibly could, but some of it backfired onto me. We were both incapacitated, but luckily it only took another 15 seconds for my parents to come running into my room, at which point they conducted a citizen's arrest until the police arrived. The cops did a sweep of the house and found damage to the outside of the lock on the back door, which indicated Clyde had picked the lock. It truly doesn't surprise me at all that lockpicking is something he is good at. Clyde went to a juvenile detention center for a couple of weeks, and then, through an annoying bureaucratic process, I managed to get him expelled from school. I was once in a relationship with the craziest girl I've ever met. I was pretty desperate for love when I thought I fell for her. Man, she might have been the hottest girl I'll ever be with, but she was so not worth it. I realized she was extremely unhealthy for me. She spent all my money and ran off all my friends. And once she had me to myself, she used up all my free time and drained my life force. That's not even going into the slightest detail about all the little things that make her craziness her own kind of special crazy. I finally couldn't do it anymore, and I broke it off as humanly as I possibly could. I did it in person in a private setting, in my car right in front of her apartment. She cried and screamed and slapped me in my face, threw some things around, and made a huge mess in my car. But no matter what she said, I told her there was no chance I would take her back. She stormed off, with the last thing she said to me before she slammed the car door being that I would regret ever doing her wrong. In reality, I actually regret ever fooling myself into thinking it was a good idea to get into bed with her in the first place. Once I drove off, I felt a wave of relief, like I had been freed from the spell of an evil witch. I spent the rest of the day doing all the things I never got to do when she was around. Then I hit up my friends and went to the bar with them for the first time in a month. I told them about how it went down, and they warned me about something, just like they warned me about the dangers of crazy girls when I first got with her. "This is not over," they said. "You might be done with her, but she's not done with you." They could not have been more correct. That very night, when my buddies and I left the bar, I went to my car and noticed something in the trough, between the hood and the windshield. I took a closer look, and I pulled out a crooked and rusted 6-inch steel nail. I keep my car very clean, so I was pretty sure it hadn't been there in the morning. I don't know anything about witchcraft or magic, and I don't believe any of it, but my ex-girlfriend was a proudly self-proclaimed witch, so I had a suspicion it had something to do with her. I asked one of my friends to ask his girlfriend about it, and she confirmed what I thought, explaining that my ex probably used it in some kind of spell to hex me, and then left it with me to make sure it did the harm it was supposed to. What a bunch of BS, I thought. But I was still concerned about what else the woman might do. After I found out it was definitely from my ex, I chucked it into the trash. Unfortunately, this was only just the beginning. Over the course of the next week, I went through an ordeal, much of which is probably familiar to many. One morning, I woke up and saw a bunch of key marks on my car. Apparently, they were runes. The next day, 3 of the tires were slashed. 24 hours after that, there was a bunch of broken glass and rusty nails on my doorstep, surrounded by a dark stain on the concrete. My friend's girlfriend said it was probably a vial of war water, but I don't know what that means, and I didn't really care. At a certain point, I even started to see her out of the corner of my eye. Just glimpses, though. When I actually turned to look at her, she would be gone, around the corner or behind something, and too far away for me to do anything about it. I was just as annoyed as I was scared. I didn't know what she was capable of, but her intentions were clearly not good. 6 days after we broke up, there was a psychotic note on my door, impaled with, you guessed it, a long rusty nail. It basically said that if I don't want to suffer the greatest agonies imaginable in this life, and then suffer even greater in the afterlife, I have to immediately go to her apartment and grovel at her feet, beg and plead for forgiveness, and swear that I'll become completely subservient to her. Real crazy stuff. I didn't do anything, obviously. I had work the next day. I was done letting my life revolve around that immature idiot. I just got my car back from the shop after getting new tires, and since she already targeted my car before, I figured she would do something else to it. I was right, but that wasn't all. When I walked back to my car at the end of my shift, my heart sank. I could see it from 100 feet away. Another damn crooked, rusty 6-inch nail. But this time, she drove it through my windshield, causing the whole thing to crack into a million pieces. Thankfully, the laminated layer held it all together, but it was totally impossible to see through it. I pulled out my phone and sat down in my car to call another tow truck, but the second I closed the door, I smelled it. My ex's perfume. It was strong, too. A chill ran down my spine at that exact moment. I instinctively knew she was right behind me. I looked in my rearview mirror and I saw her crawling out from the floorboard of the back seat. A look of pure evil on her face. Smiling, she wrapped her arms around my seat in a weird kind of hug from behind. And then I realized she was holding one of those rusty 6-inch nails in her hands. The point was directed at my heart, and from the shine at the tip, it had clearly been sharpened. She was ready to plunge into my heart. I laughed. "You're not strong enough to stab that through my sternum with that," I said. "Shut up," she screamed. "I'm strong enough to stab it through your windshield, wasn't I? What if I jam it through one of your ribs? Or why don't I just shove it down your throat? Huh? How about that, smartass?" She brought the point of the nail to my jugular, though in the moment I did not care in the slightest. I was suddenly overcome with anger. My patience was gone. All I saw was red. I grabbed my keys and turned on my car. "What are you doing?" shouted my ex. "Don't go anywhere or I'll stick you with this." She stuck the nail into my flesh and drew blood, but I barely felt it. I switched into first gear and I floored it. The nail cut the side of my neck as my ex flew backwards into the seat. She started screaming bloody murder and trying to regain her footing so she could come get at me, but I was already in second gear, racing through the lanes of the parking lot, struggling to see where I was going through the broken windshield. Once she was climbing over the center console, I slammed on the brakes. Suddenly, I noticed the crazy amount of pain that was in my neck. But she finally got what she deserved and flew straight into the windshield. The lamination still didn't give out and caught her like a net, keeping her inside. I pulled the parking brake, stepped out, then dragged the squealing maniac out of my car and threw her onto the asphalt. I sat back down in my car and locked the doors, then called the police. While they were on their way, my ex banged on the door and tried to force her way into my car. "Look what you did to me," she wailed, pointing at her face. There was a deep gash on the right side of her face, all the way from above her right eyebrow to the corner of her lip. When the police came, they arrested me and took her to the hospital. She pressed charges and we almost went to court. But at the last second, the case was dismissed thanks to my lawyers, who brought to the attention of the judge all the stalking she had been doing. In the end, my actions were ruled as self-defense. Things still aren't over for me, unfortunately. She's found a new way of ruining my life. I'm being sued in civil court now, but I think in the end my countersuit will win out. It just goes to show that you should avoid making impulsive decisions. Don't date crazy people, and I guess even if you have a sharp object being held against your throat, you should try to defend yourself as gently as possible. When I was in college and lived in the dorms, I did most of my studying either in the library or the Starbucks on campus. The library was free to get into and quieter, but the Starbucks was closer to most of my classes and had coffee. Plus, I could hang out with my friends at the same time. It was a popular place for that reason, and my preferred study spot as well. I had a routine of going there after class and immediately getting everything done so I could have my evenings free. I never paid attention to what was going on around me or who was sitting in the coffee shop. My ability to focus was pretty strong, especially with the help of caffeine and my ADHD medication. My friends weren't quite the same, however. They were much chattier and liked to people watch during their breaks. At the start of second semester, a new person showed up at the coffee shop. If nobody had told me about him, I would have assumed he had been around all year like anybody else. But my friends knew they had never seen this guy. He seemed harmless at first, just like anybody else, and he was more a new potential piece of gossip than any sort of threat. When he was pointed out to me, all I saw was another guy with a latte working on his laptop and taking notes while listening to music. My friends asked me what I thought about him, like if he was cute or if I knew who he was. He was kind of pale and a little greasy and had a weak chin, but overall, he was unassuming. "He's a stranger," I said, "and kind of an ugly one." Perhaps I said it too loud, because the noise and the laughter of my friends made him glance over at us for just a second. I looked away and got back to work. The next day, he was there at the coffee shop again, doing the exact thing he was doing the day before. Writing things down in his notebook, staring at his laptop, and occasionally looking around. I didn't think anything of it, even when I saw him every day I went there the entire next week. The only thing that struck me as strange was the fact that I was taking notice of it. I'm sure I saw the same 50 faces in there every single time, but I never even registered their existences. What was it about this guy that made me subconsciously pay attention to him? I had no idea, but then again, I had bigger fish to fry, and notes to take, and lectures to listen to, and textbooks to read. I had one class a week that was right next to the library, so naturally afterwards I would do my studying there instead of going across campus to go to Starbucks. It was nice to get a break. Peace and quiet was always nice. Nobody talked in the library. Everybody was in their own little world. Not even people watching was a thing. Everyone had their faces down and noses to the grindstone. Everyone except for that one guy. About 10 minutes into my study session, I noticed him sit down about 10 tables away. I rolled my eyes and tried to ignore him, but he kept looking at me. Not glancing, but staring for a few seconds, and then looking down once I saw. At this point, it seemed like he may have been developing a crush on me, but I was determined to not let any boys distract me from my goals. After a few more days, he faded into the background. The novelty wore off, and I no longer cared if he was around me or not. Unfortunately, as much as I tried to ignore him, the more he appeared everywhere I went. Even on my way back to my dorm, after the 6 o'clock class I had that got out at 8 p.m. I was just trying to get home after a long day of class. I walked out the door of the building and nobody was behind me except for the other students in the class that just let out, which I knew did not contain any pale, greasy men with weak chins. And yet, once I made it down the steps and onto the sidewalk, who did I see but him? That's when my stomach dropped. I kept on going as I wanted to avoid interaction. Eventually, I found myself alone with him still following me. I made it inside my dorm hall and headed to my door, which was on the first floor. I was terrified that this creep would scan his ID and follow me inside, but when I got to my dorm, I glanced back at him. He was just standing in front of the glass and staring at me. I quickly got inside my dorm and locked the door behind me. Unfortunately, my roommate wasn't there to calm my nerves. Claustrophobia started to set in for me, so I turned on some music and tried to study before bed, but I couldn't focus. It took me 3 hours to finish what should have only taken me 1. Finally, at 11 o'clock, I was finally finished. I fell asleep absolutely exhausted. I didn't even stir when my roommate came home. I had some strange nightmares, however, but I don't remember them much. All I know is I woke up in a cold sweat, but when I got up out of bed, I realized something so disturbing it changed the way I live many aspects of my life. There was a piece of paper stuck to my stomach by my sweat. When I stood up, it fell to the floor. I picked it up and read it. There were only 6 words written on it. "You are a victim, an ugly one." My heart sank to the floor. My roommate asked me what was wrong, and I begged her to tell me if she locked the door when she came home from the party she went to last night, but she just shrugged. When we checked, we found that she had left it unlocked when she stumbled in. That could potentially mean that the door was wide open for that weirdo to sneak into our room, and for what? Just to scare me? Gradually, things started to make sense. An awful, sick, demented sense I never wanted to understand. I hadn't realized that I was being stalked for the last month. That weak-chinned creep didn't even go to the school. That's why he showed up in the middle of the year and nobody knew who he was, and why he couldn't get into the dorm without following somebody in. All those notes he took were about my routine, and maybe about the routines of other girls too. But I couldn't understand why. Was it really just because I said he was ugly that set him into a month-long obsession? I reported him right away, but the school's response was lax. They said if I ever had a problem with it again, I should report it to the police. However, I guess that sick freak got bored of me and my college, because he was never seen again. My guess is he was using us as targets to practice on. In all fairness, the experience has taught me to be more aware of my surroundings and more wary of danger. After talking to my mom the other day, I just remembered a shady encounter my brother had. When I was 8 years old, I'm 20 now, my entire family moved from San Diego County to the middle of nowhere in freaking Colorado. After less than 2 years of being there and having to put up with the ridiculous weather, my oldest brother decided he'd finally had enough. So he got his GED and packed up all of his things in his crappy car, left his fares behind for us to take care of since they're illegal in California, and headed west to move in with a friend. Or at least he tried to. He didn't even make it 5 hours before his car completely died, because it couldn't handle driving through the Rockies. He was stranded in a tiny podunk town after dark, and his car got towed to a garage, while the tow truck driver offered to drive him to a cheap but nice motel to spend the night since we couldn't come get him until the next day. They passed by a Motel 6 or some other chain motel like that, but the driver said, "Ugh, I wouldn't leave my dog in that place." There's a way nicer motel just down the road for the same price, and then kept driving until they showed up at this really run-down looking place. My brother thought it looked pretty bad, but he's kind of a shy and non-confrontational person. Plus he's scrawny and completely unintimidating, so he didn't say anything and just thanked the guy. He couldn't see it at night, but when my mom and I got there the next day, we realized just how weird this place was. They had a big pool right smack dab in the middle of the parking lot, but it was drained dry and looked like it had never been used. The entire family that owned the motel, mom, dad, daughter, and son, sat on plastic lawn chairs in between the pool and the building that the front desk was in, facing the motel rooms, literally all day long. Then we saw the inside of his room. The bathroom had a small window, which isn't unusual, but it was only 2 feet off the ground, and next to the toilet, with nothing covering it or obstructing the view of anyone using the toilet, meaning anyone outside, like the owners, could catch you doing your business. There wasn't even a spot for a toilet paper holder, so the roll just had to sit on a shelf, and the whole room looked pretty run down. My brother then quietly told us he barely got any sleep the night before because he was so terrified. At first, we assumed it was just because he was sleeping in a strange place by himself, when he was only 17. His room was the kind where it's connected to the room next to it by a hallway, only a few feet long, with a door in each room, so large families staying in adjacent rooms can keep it open and get between the two without having to deal with keys. He said he heard faint noises coming from the room next to his the night before, so he opened his door to see what was going on, and there was enough of a gap underneath to see that someone was standing right on the other side of the far door. My brother watched for a few minutes, and the guy's shadow never shifted, so he got creeped out and closed his own door, making sure to lock it, and then tried to go to bed. He woke up at some point to a strange sound, and sat there trying to identify it for a minute, before suddenly he realized it was a doorknob rattling. The guy had finally opened his own door and was trying to get into my brother's room. The sound stopped after a few minutes, but he was too scared to fall back asleep in case the guy tried again and picked a lock. And he was telling us the story quietly, just in case the guy could hear him through the walls. We never saw what he looked like, but who knows if the guy watched him while he checked into the room or something. I have no idea if he was planning on hurting my brother, but I'm sure he was up to no good. Add this to the strange, frustrating conversation that my mom had with the owner of the hotel, over the phone on the drive up, and the weird-ass mechanic shop the car was towed to. And the town became one of the creepiest places that we had ever had the misfortune of stopping in. It would have costed more to fix the car than it was actually worth, so we just abandoned it and my brother had to come back home again, which he was actually very happy to do after such a freaky experience. I'll first give a little backstory to my living situation. I was about 10, possibly 11, when my mom found a job working as a live-in manager to a quaint little motel at the end of my town. She took the job, and we packed up and left my childhood home. When we first moved in, it was a disaster. Holes everywhere, and certain parts of the house smelled horrible. We later learned this was because the old manager, Steve, was a druggie, and his wife was making and dealing meth out of there. A couple months into living there, we had sort of fixed the place up and made it more livable. At this point, my mom was working full-time at the desk. We had mostly stayed towards the back of the house because of the odd setup. The way the front desk where you check in is laid out was basically in our living room. It was a tiny cramped room with just a desk on one side and a door on the other, which led to our living room. A lot, and I mean a lot of people decided to just open that door whenever they pleased, and often got a view of whatever video game my brother and I were playing. This as a kid already freaked me out, and because of the motel's past, many meth heads came by looking for Steve, and would just walk right in when they didn't believe my mom when she said they didn't work or live there any longer. One time, during summer break, back a year or two after we moved in, I decided to stay up all night and play video games. I made a little nest in the living room and I made myself comfy. It was around 1 in the morning after hours of Skyrim when I started to hear weird noises. Usually if my mom knew a regular would be late, she would leave a key in an envelope for them, which looking back doesn't seem smart at all. I heard talking and it sounded like two men speaking a different language. I figured that's what they were doing and would leave in a second, but they never did. Continued talking for like 10 minutes before I started to hear them pull on the door. At first it was gentle, as if they were just testing it. As they continued, it seemed to get more frantic and I could almost hear grunting. Soon it was full on banging on the door. I was confident that my parents would hear it, but the room was all the way in the back of the house, which was about 3 hallways down. So after a minute, I figured I might be screwed and that I was probably going to die. I was a super paranoid kid. The banging stopped, and after a few seconds, I started to hear tapping at the window behind the desk in the house. I saw very clearly a head from behind the curtain. The windows were high up, and he looked to be stretching up to get it. He started to yank on the window, trying to break it open. While he was doing this, I saw movement at the screen door in the kitchen. At this point, I was absolutely shitting myself. I mean, I was petrified. I'm guessing the guy who was at the desk door had now circled around to the screen door, while his buddy was prying at the window. He jiggled the doorknob back and forth, after a second of resuming what he was doing earlier, and now banging on that door full force. For some reason, through my fear, I decided to try and be a ninja. To up my sneak level, of course, and army crawled into a little office part connected to the desk. There was a key drop-off where people could just shove their keys into when they checked out. That was basically just a hole in the wall. I popped up, all while they were still banging on the door, and grabbed a pencil to lift up the flap. I don't know what I expected to see. They were clearly at the side of the house, but I just had a horrible feeling, like I was being surrounded. Well, it turns out I was right, because when I lifted it, I saw 2 more men standing at the door, hands in their pockets. I immediately closed it and I almost cried. During this, I failed to notice the hallway light turn on and my parents emerged, looking very distraught. As soon as my dad turned on the kitchen light and shouted, "What the hell?" all the noise stopped and the guys took off running. I could hear one of them shouting something and then nothing, just complete silence. After I told my parents about what happened the best I could through hysterics, they called the police. They showed up about an hour later and took the report. It didn't seem like this happened to anyone else in the town, but the police seemed to think it was some random workers and maybe didn't understand that we were closed. I don't know, it seems like they were just kind of race blaming, but I never really got an explanation of that night. All I know is that they didn't seem friendly, and I don't know what they would have done if they got in. I want to preface this story by stating that I've had my fair share of encounters with creepy men. This situation, however, scared the literal life out of me. It's the first time I genuinely felt like my life was in danger. My husband and I had to drive 17 hours last week to North Carolina for a wedding. It was a very tiring week, and we basically spent the entire time rushing from one family gathering to another. We were staying in a motel for the first time we were there. We had already been at this motel for a few days by the time the day of the actual wedding rolled around. The day of the wedding was hectic. We were rushing around trying to get ready to leave for the venue. My husband got ready before me so he could do some last minute things before we had to leave. That left me alone in our motel room to get ready before he returned. It was brutally hot outside, and I decided to do my hair and makeup in just my underwear so I wouldn't be sweating in my nice dress the whole time. The way this motel was laid out, the sink and mirror were in the general open area of the room, with the toilet and shower in another room, so anyone walking by our room window could see me standing in the mirror. However, I did have the curtains closed, but these curtains were a little bit sheer, so you could technically see the shadow of someone walking by on the outside, or you could see maybe the silhouette of me inside the room. I was curling my hair in the mirror when I noticed the silhouette of a man walking by my room window. As he's passing my window, I see him stop and start trying to look into my window. At first I thought it was my husband trying to see if I was ready, so I paid no mind to it. But the longer the guy stood there, bobbing his head around trying to get a better look through the curtains, I began to realize it was not my husband, Because obviously, why wouldn't he just come in? Now I'm starting to get a little freaked out. Before I could do anything though, I watch as this guy starts to go for my room door. My utter shock and horror came when he was actually able to open the door and walked right inside. Before my husband left, he forgot to pull the door shut all the way, till it clicked into its lock. He was very upset at himself when I told him this later. So now I am face to face with this man, and I am in my underwear, no less. He was at least 6 feet tall, and standing in my room. I thought to myself, this is it, he's going to attack you. That's a very scary realization to have. I also thought to myself that you're going to have to burn his eye sockets out with this curling iron if you want to survive. For a few seconds, probably only a second or two, but it felt longer. He just stood there staring at me like I was a piece of meat, and he was starving, ready to pounce on me like prey. He then began to smile the most evil-looking toothy grin I have ever seen, and started mumbling something under his breath. I really couldn't make out what he was saying completely, but I did make out the words, "Pretty lady," and "come here." I don't know if it was the fight or flight response, but I suddenly got pissed, and I charged towards him, ready to strike him with my hot curling iron. I screamed as loud as I could, "Get the heck out of here." It must have startled him because he jumped back out onto the balcony of the motel. I saw this as my chance, and I ran for the door. I luckily was able to get to the door and slam it shut right before he was about to make his second attempt at entering inside. I immediately collapsed on the floor, sobbing. I was literally too scared to move from that spot until my husband came back about 15 minutes later. I told him the whole thing and he was freaked out. He initially wanted to find the guy so he could beat the shit out of him, but I refused to let him leave my side. He must have apologized at least 1,000 times during the rest of our trip for not making sure that the door was locked before leaving. But I told him that the day, and that whole trip really, was so rushed I could see how it happened. We went to the motel management and told them the story as well. And the police were obviously called, and I gave them a description of the guy so they could see if it was someone who was staying in the motel. After going around to the few motel occupants, they said no one matched his description and concluded that he wasn't staying there. Obviously, we were late to the wedding that day, and the whole experience just ruined what should have been a happy time. We planned on staying another day before our long drive home, but we both just wanted out of there as soon as possible. We skipped most of the reception and went back to the motel, packed up, and left. I'm usually so vigilant with locking my doors, especially when I'm home alone. Just goes to show you, all it takes is that one time for you to forget to check your locks, and that certain unwanted guest is inviting themselves in. Last year, my best friend Allie and I went on this great American road trip, trying to ski in as many states as possible in the month that we had taken off from work. We did a lot of skiing, and a lot of driving, and even a lot of sleeping in various couches, truck stops, and of course, in motels. Most motels were fine. Some had great free breakfasts, and some had dirty hot tubs that left us scrubbing ourselves in the shower, and joking about getting pregnant from the water. Some had weird stains that we tried to not think about. Some were spotless but cold, and a few were amazing, but only one was terrifying. We stopped at the motel around 10:30 after a long day of skiing, followed by a good 6 hours of driving. We were tired and sore and ready for bed. We had made some wrong turns, and we were not exactly sure where we were. We didn't want to use our data on our Canadian phone, so we were navigating old school with a map. It was mildly unsuccessful, but we were pretty sure we had a few hours of driving into the next town, and we were not looking forward to it. So when we saw the glorious neon sign that blinked motel and vacancy at us, we didn't need to say anything. We both knew that was where we were staying for the night. As we pulled into the front of the office, I noted that we were the only people staying there. I told myself that it wasn't creepy. We were stopping close to a summer tourist spot midwinter. Of course there would be an excess of rooms. In fact, maybe we should have considered ourselves lucky that they were open at all. It was definitely not creepy. We entered the office, and a shrill little bell announced our entry to the world. We waited for someone to come to the front desk. Then we waited a bit longer. We shared looks with lifted eyebrows and tapped our fingers impatiently on the desk. "Hello?" Allie called out in silence. "Somebody here?" We waited for a few more minutes, then the door behind the counter slowly opened. An old man poked his head out, spotted us, and his face split into a wide grin. "Guests," he said. "You know, I thought I heard something, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Just my imagination. We don't get a lot of visitors around this time, and two beautiful young ladies, too." Ah, I'm so sorry I kept you waiting. Just couldn't believe that I had such luck. Welcome, welcome, welcome. He was certainly an odd duck, but I used to work long, lonely night shifts, so I know how excited you can get when something happens. So, travel-weary strangers, can I offer you a bed to rest your head? He smiled. Yeah, how much is a double room? He looked at us, grin not wavering. $99 for 2 beds and $79 for 1. I was ready to splurge for the 2 beds. Allie moved a lot in her sleep and hogged the covers. Last night she had kept waking me up. Let's do the 2 beds. I looked at her pleadingly. She gave me a quick look filled with annoyance. And I looked back at the man. His grin had faded. He looked as annoyed as Allie for a moment. When he noticed me looking at him, his grin snapped back into place. Ah, actually it seems we only have the 1 bedrooms ready. I'm so sorry. Wait, what? I couldn't help but burst out. There are like no people here. Oh yes, that is the problem, isn't it? Sometimes we don't keep all the rooms prepped in the winter. Save costs, you know? I mean, I considered that. It didn't make sense at all, but I was too tired to argue. You know what? For such pretty ladies, I'll give you a discount. How about $69 for the 1 bedroom? We'll take it, Allie responded before I even had time to think. Thank you. You can pay by card, right? No, I'm afraid not. We never got around to that modern stuff. Gotta stay off the grid, right? He laughed at his own joke. After that, I shuddered involuntarily. We had cash. It was fine. It was creepy, but we were tired. We paid, got the keys, and drove up and parked in front of the room. I grabbed my stuff from the car, unlocked the door, and surveyed the room. It looked clean enough. The bed was big, and I was tired as hell. Hey, I'm gonna go for a little walk, actually. My legs are so stiff, Allie said from behind me. Wanna come? I eyed the bed. It looked too comfortable. Allie had a good point, but that bed was speaking to me. Nah, I'll just shower and crash. Okay, cool, no problem. I won't be very long, she said. Then she turned and left. I slammed the door shut behind me and stripped out of my clothes as fast as I could. I jumped in the shower and the luxurious feeling of hot water ran down my body. I had to force myself to get out. I went into the room, put on my PJs, and laid down on the bed. Allie still wasn't back yet, but her nighttime strolls sometimes lasted as long as an hour, even when she was this tired. She has a hard time falling asleep sometimes, and those walks apparently helped her. I got my phone out and tried connecting to the Wi-Fi, but it didn't work. I immediately got annoyed. Not because I really needed the Wi-Fi, but because I had paid for it, and I wanted it. So I just laid there, kind of annoyed and glaring at the ceiling fan. It was a weird model, something black sticking out from the bottom. I had never seen that before. I wondered idly what it did. Then I thought about how we were the only people staying here, and how Allie was walking somewhere alone in the dark, and how I didn't know where she was, and how creepy that guy had been when he laughed at his own joke about staying off the grid. Then the familiar feeling of fear started creeping into my guts. I knew where my mind was going. I have an overactive imagination. I tend to turn every situation into a horror movie in my head. It can be a real problem in my dating life. I think most guys are serial killers, and Allie always makes fun of me for it. I thought about how the guy had offered us 2 beds and then refused to give it to us. Did he want us in this room specifically? And why? He probably had some creepy fantasy of 2 young girls sharing a bed. I shook my head, trying to stop my mind from spinning out of control. I get out of the bed and I went over to the huge mirror on the wall. I got my hair out of the towel and started brushing it. I couldn't quite get rid of the uneasy feeling at the pit of my stomach. I knew I wouldn't sleep well that night. For some reason, I thought of the one-way mirror scene in Cabin in the Woods. God, why do I watch horror movies, by the way? They always come back to me at the worst times. I vaguely recalled that there's a way to check if it's a real mirror. I touched the mirror and there was no gap. I could see my eyes widening in fear in the mirror. No, wait, that can't be it. I tried to reason with myself. That's just ridiculous. This is fine. We're fine. It's gotta be the other way around. But maybe. I realized I could check the bathroom mirror. It was one of those medicine cabinet mirrors. That one was clearly real. I walked slowly into the bathroom. Please be the same, I muttered. I wiped the fogged mirror, took a breath, and slowly pressed my index finger against the surface. Ice filled my veins. A gap. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my mind. We needed to get out of there. And where was Allie? I felt panic bubbling. I needed to get out of there. Okay, but play it cool, I thought. They could be watching. Who the hell are they? I can't let them know I know. I have to get out of here. The black thing on the fan. My breath caught in my throat. It had to be a camera. I went back into the bedroom and started putting my stuff back in my little bag. I hoped it looked innocent enough. Maybe we wanted an early start, right? Maybe I had OCD and liked all my stuff in my bag. It was fine. I went to put the bag in the car and I turned the doorknob. But it didn't move. I tried to stay calm and to not panic. They could be watching. Maybe it was jammed. I tried the handle again. Nothing. I used all my force. Nothing. I got my phone out and figured I'd text Allie and call the police. I had to do something. Of course, no signal. I literally wanted to cry. I looked around the room for a window. For the first time, I noticed they had bars in front of them. I've seen that before, of course. It's a safety precaution. My ground floor apartment in the city also had them so that people can't break in. I never before considered that they also very effectively stop people from breaking out though, as well. I figured the door must unlock from the outside only. Once you're in the room, you're stuck there. I pinned all of my hopes on that idea. Allie would come back, unlock the door, and we'd get out of there. The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. I kept trying to come up with a plan, with something, but my mind was drowning in adrenaline. Finally, I heard footsteps outside. Allie was back. I got up, standing right next to the door, and she put the key in the lock, turned it, and it opened. Allie, get in the car right now, I said as I pushed her out of the room. What, why? There's a camera in the room, I hissed as I pushed her back. Her eyes went wide, and she immediately obliged. I unlocked the car, threw my bag in the back, and we both jumped in. The door to the adjacent room bursted open, and the old man came running out. He slammed his hands on the hood as if he was trying to hold us back with his bare hands. We both screamed as I skidded out of there. Even in my panic, I could see several shapes behind him in the room. He had not been alone. I just kept driving, praying that they weren't following us. We have to call the police, Allie said after an hour of driving. We have to. I agreed. She used her precious data to find the number of the local sheriff's office and called them up. I only heard half of the conversation. Hey, I want to report an almost crime. I'm sorry. I'm not quite sure. What? No, sir, it's not a joke. We were staying at this hotel, and there was a camera in one of those one-way mirrors, I interjected. What? She turned to me. Yeah, tell him. And a one-way mirror. And the door didn't unlock from the inside, she said, looking to me for confirmation. I nodded. There were people in the room behind that mirror, too. Her eyes went wide in fear as she repeated the information. Then she described the location of the motel. Yes. No, she sounded uncertain. We've been skiing, she frowned. Yeah? No, that's fine, we'd rather not. I looked at her quizzically. No, really, we're already out of state, we just wanted to let you know. And then she abruptly hung up. What was that? I asked. I don't know, he wanted us to come back and give a statement. Shouldn't we? I asked. She didn't say anything for a little while. I don't know, I got a really bad vibe. Let's not, please. In small town American sheriff's office. That's likely totally how you die in horror movies. We're not in a horror movie though. Are you sure? I shrugged. I wasn't really stoked on the idea of going back either. Frankly, I was still worried that they were following us. I really didn't want to get pushed off the road by some psycho hillbilly motel manager. And we had told the police. We had done our part. Or so I thought. But yesterday, there was a story in the news about 3 young girls going missing. They were road tripping in that area. Never made it back to Seattle. I can't help but wonder if they stopped at that same motel. I also can't help but wonder what would have happened if Allie didn't take that walk. If we both got locked in that room. What the people in the other room expected. And what were they going to do? If they just watch, or if Allie and I could have been that missing person story. So this happened a little over 2 years ago now, and I wanted to post it somewhere just to look back on it one day and never forget the lesson that I learned. Disclaimer, yes, this is real, but I wish it wasn't. It was 2016 and I had just started a new job at a motel. It was low pay, but I needed an office job. One of my friends, Michael, got me this job. For a few days I did training with the owner in the mornings, and for 2 nights Michael trained me. Our job was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Nothing exciting, just checking guests in and doing paperwork. My boss, however, the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for a week, which is attributed to the swift training I had to endure. So it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property and large glass windows all around the office building with a glass door. There was no night window like most motels have. It was fairly early in the night, and about 1 a.m. I was just doing my normal check-in paperwork when a man walks in and asks if we have any rooms available. Usually if someone is sketchy, my boss has me lie and say no, but he seems normal at the moment. Without hesitation, I said yes, of course, just for one, and he replies yes. So I begin creating the reservation on the computer when I notice he starts swatting the air and making spitting noises as if he's being surrounded by flies. I tried to ignore it. As far as I was convinced, it wasn't my business. So I tried to check him into the room quickly as possible. I give him his key and he's on his way. At this point in time, I could be described as very timid. I had a lot going on in my personal life at the time, so I hope you can all understand my reaction to what happens next. The man comes back from his room and slams his hand on the glass door and causes me to jump. Absolutely frightened to the bone, I look up to see him just staring at me. He cracks the door and puts his head through and says, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room?" And my only defense is trying to be helpful, so I replied, "Maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me give you another one." The look he had in his eyes was inexplicable. I felt like I was in absolute danger. I handed him his new key and he went back to his room. I tried texting Michael because he is the one who trained me, though it was the middle of the night and he was asleep. With no reply from Michael, I noticed the man trudging down the stairs to come back, and I go into absolute panic mode. I run to the back office and lock the door, and I pull out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when working at night. I hear the man in the office yelling, "Hello, hello, why won't you let me into my room? Do you not like me?" Me being an absolute idiot and not standing my ground and calling the police when I'm feeling scared, I decided to take the situation on alone. I reply, "Hey, I'm just on the phone. I'll be right out." I then start calling Michael over and over for help, but no answer. I decided to take a few deep breaths and then step out of the office. The man was not there. He was in the bathroom. I start hearing him talking to himself angrily, saying, "Kill her, kill her." Then my heart sank. Still being an idiot and not calling the police, he comes out and I say, "Hey, your key was broken. Let me escort you to your room." He agrees, thankfully. I was wearing a long sleeve sweater, so with my arms down, I was able to hide my knife in my hand while holding it. I began to walk outside and he seemed insistent to walk behind me. We began making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continuously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stops at a room and I stop at his room a few doors down. I smile and say, "Oh, that's the wrong room. This is your room here," as it clearly said on the door. The whole time he was going to someone else's room and trying to open the door, and I felt bad for them. Quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns away. I felt bad for confiding in them about the guy, but they seemed willing to keep an eye out and an ear. The next night, the man came back, but I had the doors locked and told him that we were all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he didn't take me very seriously. I continued to work there on the night shift for the next year, where many other strange encounters happened. Moral of the story is, if you ever feel uncomfortable, always call the police.